Oh, yes, that would be a good idea. Will we be tweeting people, Sam? Will it automatically tweet?
It'll automatically tweet and put it into the comments, which I'm looking at now.
From Podland News?
Yeah, so we are live, chaps.
Excellent.
So over to you, James.
Oh, right. Okay.
Can you take audience questions, just out of curiosity?
We can.
Right. Here we go then. Off we go. Welcome to Podland, the last word in podcasting news. It's Friday, the 20th of May, 2022. I'm James Gridland, the editor of podnews.net.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the MD of River Radio, the podcast first radio station now on DAB.
You want me to? I can introduce myself. Didn't want to interrupt your flow. I'm Ashley Carman, a reporter at Bloomberg. I am a guest on this podcast this week.
It's going to be very exciting all the way through. Podland sponsored by Squadcast, the remote recording studio that your audience will love. Squadcast lets you create high quality audio and video content just using your browser. And using Dolby Enhanced audio mastering, they'll sound better than ever. And as a disclosure, thanks Squadcast, but we're not using you this week. We're using StreamYard.
They'll want a refund,
Yeah. So in case anything goes wrong, don't go blaming Squadcast. And we're also sponsored by Buzzsprout, podcast hosting made easy. Last week, 3,282 people started a Buzzsprout. Started a Buzzsprout with podcast. Started a podcast with Buzzsprout. You can too at buzzsprout.com. And because Buzzsprout supports chapters and transcripts, we do too.
Podland is where James and I review the latest news in the podcast industry. And this week we're joined by Ashley Carman. Hello, Ashley.
Hello.
Where in the world are you?
I am in Brooklyn, New York right now. My home.
And we are also, for the first time, broadcasting live on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
I'm slightly. Oh, look, there we are. I'm slightly concerned. Let me just do a quick retweet there. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? So yes, it's all a thrill. I haven't done anything live for a long time. So if I don't look at the camera or do any of that, then it's all my fault.
Right, James. Now, where have you been? You've been away, been in Sweden.
I have Bork and all that. Is that racist? I don't know. Anyway, yes, I've been at Radio Days Europe in Malmö in Sweden, and all kinds of people there. I ended up interviewing Johan Seidefors, who's the Nordic head of content at Spotify. There was a future in scripted podcasts, which I thought was interesting, quite a difficult gig, given that he was essentially in front of a load of people from the radio industry. And obviously, Spotify and the radio industry, possibly not the best of bedfellows. So it was interesting seeing that.
Well, as you know, Ashley, you might not know, but I also own a radio station. And I call it a podcast first radio station because all of our shows are 1 hour long. We podcast them automatically. And I think that the marriage between podcasting and radio is going to become very similar. I think, what's the difference between a 1 hour show that, the only thing that's different is when you've got a live football or a live sports match. Otherwise, I don't think there's a lot of difference, is there?
Live radio is useful and important for some things. You shouldn't probably underestimate the excitement of hearing something at the same time as everybody else. Ashley, I don't know how much do you listen to live radio? You've got some of the best live radio in New York City.
Now that I commute to the office 3 times a week, I listen to WNYC in the morning when I get ready, which genuinely I just find to be the best way to get the news in the morning. It's one, I can just listen to my AirPods when I'm getting ready, but 2, I get a sampling of everything. It's local, as well as they bring in some of the news from NPR, so it has the entire country and the world. I mean, later on, this is a little later for me, but they do the BBC. So yeah, I do listen to the radio. I really enjoy it as a morning routine. But I do think having the podcast version would be helpful if I missed that. And in the evening, I'm like, well, what did I miss this morning? I could go back and listen. So I do think, didn't Spotify buy Wishka? And isn't their whole business around making radio like on demand and helping serve ads? So
it's exactly what I use. So basically I use Wishka with my radio station. So that's how I secretly, used it. So we take the live feed from this radio station, and literally within 5 minutes of the radio station program finishing, it's available as a podcast.
Yeah. And I think it's like, why not do both?
Exactly.
We're doing the work. Why not?
Now, you met some people out there as well. You also met Tom Webster, formerly of Edison Research, now with...
Actually, still with Edison Research until the end of this month. Yeah, he was talking about habit being the number one growth opportunity for podcasting. Very much pointing out, that is it's something I've been saying for a while as well. The reason why radio is so successful, the reason why 9 out of 10 people still listen to the radio, and the UK figures have just come out, and even more young people are listening to the radio, which I find amazing. But the reason because of that is because it's habit, and that's what people, people have woken up to the radio for years and years, and that's what will continue driving that. And Tom was very much arguing that habit will be the thing that makes podcasting continue to end up growing. So he was great. What was fascinating is he was talking next to Denmark Radio's Rasmus Kidde, and Rasmus was basically saying exactly the same thing. And they hadn't even, checked, any of that stuff. So that was good. The other person who I thought was really interesting, we had a session. There was a podcast summit at the Radio Days Europe, and we had a session about monetization. Rob Greenlee was speaking from Libsyn's Advertisecast and very much talking about how monetization works and everything else. And then we had Daniela Murphy from Acast, and she looks after podcast creative in the UK and Ireland. And she was just talking really passionately about how good advertising can be, how good podcast advertising can be, and just some really nice ideas around creative that were, more things than just non-stop radio spots and stuff like that. So it was great actually seeing something from Acast, which was, really talking about the interesting creative things that you can do in terms of advertising. And people only mentioned how intimate podcasting was about 7 times, so that was good. So we didn't go too much there.
Okay, Ashley, how come you weren't out at Radio Days Europe as well?
I want to come to Europe. I'm ready next year. I mean, I am actually going to Europe in a few weeks.
Oh,
not to brag, but not for fun podcast conferences.
Okay, dare we ask, where are you going?
I'm going to Spain for a wedding.
Oh,
and
nice.
In Portugal. If anyone has recommendations, please send them my way.
Barcelona, if you're there, I'll let you know a few places.
Yes, keep your mobile phone safely on you at all times.
Yeah.
Oh my!
I might get a burner phone. For
oh my! But but it's a lovely place, and the home of RSS.com, who one half is based there, and also the home of Ivux, who are a good bunch of people. But you're not going there for work, so that will be the last.
You never know. You never know.
Yeah, no, indeed.
But next year, Ashley, we will get you over because Jess Kaufman's going to be doing She Podcasts over in London.
Oh, fun! Yes, I really do want to come over.
I keep announcing it.
Yeah, you keep on announcing this. Is this news?
Well, it is to Jess.
It is to me.
No,
should I be reporting this?
You should. Yes, I sent her a list of speakers the other day.
Oh, excellent!
And I've got a venue for it already.
There you go.
Yeah, the William Wallace Gallery. Beautiful old gallery.
There
Central
you go.
London.
A gallery named after a man. Good work, Sam.
Good point, James. I might have to change that venue.
Anyway, moving on.
Yes, indeed. Right. So, Brian Barletta, friend of the show, he was also over there at Radio Days. What was Brian talking about?
Yeah, he was. He did a couple of sessions. I think what was exciting about Radio Days Europe was that there was this specific session all around podcasting and the Podcast Summit, which I moderated on the Sunday. And then there were lots of different things around podcasting during the main event as well. And it's been the case. I've been going to Radio Days Europe for the last 13 years, it's been the case that podcasting has always been kind of a side thing and isn't the main focus, but actually much more podcasting in the main session, including a session with Brian, and Rob Greenlee was there. Julie Shapiro was over from PRX and Radiotopia. Really good to hear that as well. And if you'd like to hear a full interview with Julie Shapiro, then that is on Matt Deegan's podcast. It's called The Media Podcast, and I'm on it as well, trying to take part in a quiz. But you can fast forward through that bit. But Julie's bit is really good, so it's well worth having a listen.
Not a show spoiler, but can I just say James doesn't win?
Well, you clearly haven't listened yet.
Oh, it's going on again.
That's all I can say.
Okay. Well, Matt's also put in his newsletter this week more confidence about platforms, talking about how radio stations are now not driving traffic, which is interesting, to other platforms like Apple and Spotify, but are trying to keep all the traffic on their own platforms.
Now, there was a brand new story this week all about Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts made a few tweaks and tucks to their mobile app, but or their iOS app, obviously. Still waiting for their Android app. They're not stupid. They'll launch that soon. But they also launched Apple Podcasts Delegated Delivery. Okay. Which is quite a name, isn't it? Ashley, what was Apple Podcasts delegated delivery? Did you sort of figure out a simple way of explaining it?
I mean, the simplest way is that Apple Podcast subscriptions, which is very proprietary, you have to use their backend to upload your subscription content. If you want the button on the app, obviously you can do private RSS feeds. Now you can do it through some of the hosting providers that they're working with. So you don't have to necessarily log into the backend to upload that content. It's through an API, which I think some people found pretty interesting because that's new for Apple Podcasts. So yeah, I mean, it's stuff. I think it's pretty cool. It's interesting in comparison to Spotify's, I think they call it open access for their subscription work, where they're working with different, more like subscription oriented platforms, like a Supercast or something, versus the actual hosting platforms. So pretty interesting comparisons there.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, I think Spotify's open access would work, for example, if you pay money to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg would like to make some, super paid for podcasts. Then you could log in through your Spotify account and somehow get that in there. Whereas, and I think Acast has worked on the same sort of thing as well. But really interesting to see Apple, as you say, working on an API, opening that. One would guess that perhaps there'll also be, just adding a really simple publish your podcast on Apple Podcasts button at some point. I know that Buzzsprout was telling us a while back that only something like 69% of their shows are available on Apple Podcasts. So, a third of people on Buzzsprout just find getting their show into Apple Podcasts too difficult, too complicated. You need credit cards, you need access to, a laptop of some sort. So therefore, actually, if this also helps make life a little bit easier to get into Apple Podcasts, then that's probably a good thing too.
Yeah,
I noticed. Sorry, Ashley, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, it seems like they're maybe taking a bit of a cue from the success of Anchor. I mean, Spotify at least has seen quite an influx of podcasts, according to them. So if nothing else, it seems like they're at least taking a little bit of a cue there and aiming for that creator audience.
I noticed somebody called Ashley C on Twitter noted a little point. I don't know if that, you want to add on this, but you noted that Megaphone and Anchor weren't participating in this launch for some strange reason.
Yeah, I just thought that was, pretty striking, considering I think many of the big networks use Megaphone, and Apple Podcast subscriptions launched with some of the biggest networks. So, I just thought it was an interesting contrast. I'm curious if they will work together. I don't know if they're frenemies, enemies, friends. I have no idea.
Yeah, Acast seems to be the only one who's got a foot in both camps.
Yes.
They've got a foot in both camps, but they've not actually. They've said that they will launch with Spotify Open Access at some point in the future, but they haven't launched with that yet. My understanding is that all of these services are, they're great, but in terms of Spotify, there's an issue around caching audio. It comes back to the way that Spotify has always worked. And so therefore, that may not be of interest to somebody like, potentially, Acast, because of the way that Acast monetizes. But interesting. And we don't necessarily know whether or not Apple works in the same way as well. Because if delegated delivery, I think the clue is in the word delivery. That's delivering audio to Apple for them to then make available in their platform. Doesn't sound as if that's going to be still served by the host. It sounds as if it's going to be cached by Apple as it currently works. So, again, is there a question around how that works with a company like Acast? But interesting to end up seeing that.
Maybe the way that YouTube integrates as well with hosts, because clearly they'll want to cache it locally and want to host it themselves.
Yeah, YouTube is fascinating because, of course, it's producing lots of different versions of the video, as indeed Spotify is. When you do a video podcast, it's producing lots of different versions of the video. So again, is YouTube going to have pass through or not for specific podcast hosts? Who knows? I certainly. Have you heard anything? Obviously, YouTube is sponsoring something at the podcast show next week. I will be standing on a YouTube stage, showing a slide from YouTube that I shouldn't have. So we'll see if that we'll see if that ends up. Yeah, we'll see if that ends up flying. Do you know whether or not they might be announcing anything next week?
Watch the eyes, James, now very carefully.
I don't. I really don't. I haven't heard anything. I'm very curious. I think we've all been kind of waiting now for months. Kai's been in the position for a bit now. I don't think it's been a full year or anything, but still, it's been a minute. I'm excited to hear if they announce anything. I'm waiting for it too, but now I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to find out. Some people have been saying, "Oh, yeah, they're going to be announcing something," and I'm there. In reality, why would they be announcing something in a small country off the coast of Europe? Why would that be a thing if you're a big American company? So I don't think that's going to be where they announce it, if they are announcing something. But, I could well be proved wrong again.
Disappointment 2.0. We're looking forward to it. Now, talking about companies announcing stuff, Apple came out this week with iOS 15.5, iPad 15.5, and Mac OS 12.4. Sounds like they've been bringing stuff out before WWDC. The biggest thing was they bringing out annual paid subscriptions within the Apple Podcast app. But also, one thing that you noted, James, was Apple Podcast app has now had a welcome tweak for automatic download settings. What are they doing?
Yeah, so now you can basically say, I want to keep every single episode of this show, but I only want to keep the last episode of that show, for example. If nobody wants to keep 20 or 30 old pod newses in their in their app, but they might want to keep the latest one. So I'm surprised that it didn't have. I don't use iPhone, as regular listeners will know. So I was surprised to learn that it didn't actually have that sort of control in there anyway. But I think it's interesting, actually seeing Apple Podcasts basically continuing to work on that app, continuing to tweak it. There was a time, I think, wasn't there, where there were no new features in the Apple Podcasts app for a number of years, and now we're seeing tweaks every single it seems like every single version of iOS.
Yeah, clearly there's a vested interest there. I don't know how high up it goes, but the fact that they see potentially a revenue opportunity with the subscriptions, creating the delegate delivery. You have to make sure your app is up to snuff if you're going to want people to be using it all the time. So, I'm glad to see investment there and more hiring and new products and new features.
I mean, Sam and I joke, or rather I joke mostly about, Apple aren't stupid. They're going to be launching an Android app. They already have an Android app, of course, for TV. They've got one for Apple Music. They've got one for, warn me if I'm being tracked by one of those horrible little air tracking things. So they've clearly got Android apps there. Do you think? Do you think I'm mad, assuming that they might be
No,
launching
I've been waiting also for that announcement because I'm like, they have to. They just have to. If you want a subscription to do well, you want more people to be able to access it. So given that Android is the dominant OS for smartphones, they should probably consider launching one sooner than later.
I have a 200,000 sat bet with Adam Curry as to whether or not they will launch one. I say they will by the end of the year. Adam says they won't. So we'll find out.
By the end of the year. Okay. That's I don't know. I don't know if I believe by the end of this year. I hope they do it in general, but I for some reason I'm not feeling by the end of this year, but I'm literally guessing. So
yeah, well, so Ashley, you spent 6 years at The Verge. You did all kinds of things with them. You wrote, of course, Hot Pod, which I believe is a podcast newsletter, which is very exciting. You have been with Bloomberg for what, 3 months now? Something like that?
About that, yeah.
And so, how different have you found that? Is it? I always think of Bloomberg as being very serious and very, very business focused. Is it quite different working for a company like that?
It's definitely different because like the output in general, where I now am not doing a regular 3 times a week newsletter. I had, Aria with me when I was doing Hot Pods, so she wrote an edition every week, but still twice a week newsletter. That's a lot of writing. I think it doesn't sound like a lot, but James, it's a lot. And so, now I'm doing, a little bit less writing, really trying to focus on finding some new stories, new things to write about. It's freed me up to really explore different stories. But it's definitely a different environment. I mean, Verge came through blog world, we're all like, I was a gadget blogger at The Verge for a while. So just a different world, but it's exciting.
And you're on terminals. I know nothing about Bloomberg. What is this terminal that you keep on talking about?
So that's how Michael Bloomberg made all his money, was the terminal sales. It basically is like everything you could ever want about finance at your fingertips. I can search kind of anything. It's like almost like the internet contained in itself.
Right. Do you get given one?
Yeah. Well, it's weird. It's like I have like a little terminal like verification system.
Right.
It's almost like a VPN or something where I log in and then I verify, and then on my MacBook I can get it. But at work it's like a software program basically. You wouldn't think of it as anything different. But yeah, like all my email lives in there, all my calendar. We don't use like Gmail. We have Slack, but it's not a huge Slack culture. It's very different. So yeah, learning about terminal commands.
Yeah.
So one of the things I have observed, Ashley, between your previous career and now, is that you're scooping a lot more. Are you getting given the stories, or do you have more resources to get stories? What is it? Because clearly you are doing a great job scooping all these new stories. How's that changed for you?
I mean, it's always a hustle. It's never easy. But yeah, I mean, I think that Bloomberg really cares about those scoops. We want to be the first if we can to most news. And if we're not the first, we want to try to, write it as thoroughly and as accurately and with as much insight as we can. So I would say, I'm constantly trying to get more stories, never feel like I'm doing enough. But yeah, the scoops definitely, I don't know if it's kind of the same as at The Verge, just always trying to find something to write about. But I would say the focus is definitely on that.
Will you grow the team around you? Is the plan to grow a team around the podcasting?
I don't think so right now. You all, I think, know. I know James knows my editor, Lucas. So he's been on the podcast beat for a while now. Like he's been writing about it for a long time. So it's really me and him. And then they brought me in, of course, to help break up. I'm also going to be covering the music industry as well. and kind of this broader idea of creators, which obviously can be podcasters, video podcasters, whoever makes money on the internet, really. So yeah, we have a team. I don't think there's plans to, necessarily build out the podcast world, but we definitely have a great media coverage team and telecom team.
And given your sort of like James, the Mystic Meg view of the world in podcasting, what are you looking forward to later in this year? Is there anything you think is going to change?
I would say like the big story I'm curious about is obviously for the past few years, we've been covering a lot of the investments happening in podcast world and audio world, startups, Spotify spending a ton, Amazon spending a ton. You had the shooting star that was Facebook for all of a year.
In your country.
Yeah, right. All sorts of different platforms, kind of saying they're interested in audio. But now with this sort of economic downturn that is kind of happening, I'm really interested to see how these companies treat the audio world. And if this was more of a like aspirational, this could be our next thing, let's invest and see how it goes. And now we're going to see that fall by the wayside just because it's like, well, money's tight. We got to watch our investments. That's just what I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out. I don't know if that's what will happen. I assume Spotify's here to be here, and probably Amazon as well. But I don't know if any other companies are going to necessarily keep doubling down on any audio efforts.
I've got a bet as well, haven't I, James?
What's your bet?
Spotflix.
Oh, yes.
I bought the domain the other day, so in case. I now have Spotflix. If you want it, Daniel, you know where to find me now.
His lawyers know where to find you.
Well, that's fine. They can pay me for it as well. I don't mind where the money comes from.
What's the timeline for that bet?
Yeah.
Looking at the share price of both of them and the amount of people that are leaving both companies, I think it could be any time soon because when you look at Amazon, they've got video, audio, books, they've got the full shooting match. You look at the same with Apple, they have the full stack, and it's Netflix, and it's also I'd say, Spotify, who are struggling basically on both sides, and the two together as one actually would be able to compete much better, I think. I don't know. So I think
I hear a lot of speculation about that as well. I mean, there's some Netflix blood on like the board of Spotify, and I believe their CFO used to be at Netflix as well. Well, their old CFO used to be at Netflix as well. And obviously the subscription model has been kind of Netflix influenced. They're both in the intention game. I could see that being interesting.
And you can actually see, I find it interesting that you can now turn off the video in Netflix and just consume some of their content in audio form, and similarly, you can turn off, you can turn on the video in Spotify. So the actual products are getting closer and closer as well. I find the whole thing fascinating. So it'll be really interesting to see, quite what happens there.
Totally, yeah.
Shall we move on to? I'm curious about your take on who's number one for podcasting, Ashley, because there's been quite a lot of new numbers that have come out last week. Edison, what should we call these days? Edison Podcast Metrics came out and said that the number one in terms of publishers was SXM Media. Podtrac came out, of course, and said that the number one is iHeartMedia. So you then have media monitors owned by iHeartMedia who say that the number one is iHeartMedia, surprisingly. And Triton's figures have just come out today, talking about figures for US podcast publishers, and they say again that SXM Media is number one. How confusing do you think all of this is? iHeart number one? Aren't they number one? How confusing is it all for the industry, or frankly, should I not be caring about this?
I don't want to say you shouldn't care about things you're passionate about. So care. But
okay.
But I mean, it's just, if you don't have every single player, and by player I mean like network or show or on the same platform submitting the same type of data, I mean, it's just really hard to draw any conclusions. You've pointed it out. It's like, well, iHeart's not on Triton, and NPR is not on this one or whatever it is. And it's like, well, then we can't, it's just, you can't compare. You just can't. So I don't know. I don't take too much stock in it, to be honest with you, but it is a really nice marketing line to be able to say you're number one podcast network.
It is a really nice marketing line, but if marketing lines aren't true, then that's probably not a great.
Well, they're number one asterisk on.
Yeah, and they do that on Podtrack, and they do that very well. Yeah, they highlight that very well. I do find it interesting that iHeartMedia isn't measured by Triton, who iHeart own. You'd have thought there was something there, but no, I just find that sort of line, really interesting, and I'm just sort of curious as to what the industry thinks of all of that. We also got some new numbers this week from the BBC, from BBC Sounds. They're claiming a record audience of 4 million users per week for their app here in the UK. And I compared that, 4 million is a great thing for a podcast app. I compared that to their live radio, which reaches 34 million. So there's still quite some way to go, but quite interesting seeing their total global podcast downloads across the quarter was 288 million, which makes the BBC about the same size as Wondery. I suspect that Wondery has rather fewer staff than the BBC, something tells me, but they do, obviously the BBC makes rather a lot more stuff. But, interesting seeing those figures because, of course, the BBC is putting quite a lot of exclusive stuff onto their, onto their app as well.
Yeah, I've been very curious about the BBC as someone who obviously lives in the US, and I don't have this intimate familiarity with the BBC, but I've heard there's kind of similarly to what's happening here with NPR that I've written about a bit. I've heard there's kind of like a talent exodus going on over there. I don't know if I've just been curious about that as someone who, again, hasn't been able to dive in so deeply.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the talent exodus that we're seeing from NPR as well. And a lot of it is due to the sort of place that those large organizations are to work at. But I think also a lot of it is just due to freedom of IP and allowing yourself to be able to, take a show that, and we're seeing a little bit of this in terms of Gimlet, and Spotify and those sorts of organizations as well, where people want to be able to take away their ideas and make something of them. And clearly, especially if you're working for somebody like the BBC that, I worked there for 2 years, best 2 years of my life. And I know all of the rules and the regulations that they end up having to follow. So I think from that point of view, it's it's hard work from their side. And if you could make your life a little bit more easy creatively, then perhaps that's a plan. But yeah, I think that there's an exodus going on actually in all large organizations, because we are now seeing how easy it is for you to be a small company or a small one-person, show, and be able to actually, monetize those quite successfully. And I think, we're seeing more of that in terms of Acast and those sorts of services, and of course, Megaphone as well. So I think it's going to be really interesting.
I think distribution is the key, isn't it? I mean, the BBC, NPR used to be the only way to get mass audience distribution. Now you can do that straight over the web and direct to consumer, right? So I think the other thing that's interesting, though, it may be a thing to think about if you're naming your podcast, put your name in it, because then the BBC and NPR can't have it, right? So Top Gear didn't put their name in it, and so the BBC kept that IP and just put new presenters in.
Yes.
Mark Kermode and Simon Mayo kept it. Peter Crouch kept it.
Yes.
Emily Maitlis kept it. But Americast and Newscast stayed with the BBC. So put your name in your podcast is the answer.
Are you going to be doing any podcasts with Bloomberg?
It's possible. They have, a podcast network, of course, but nothing right now. Like nothing, on the agenda. I think I'd have to probably. I'm just trying to get settled first.
Yeah, you're still getting your feet under the table.
Make sure it says Ashley Carman in the name then.
Yes.
Right, exactly. I'm going to try to keep that going for a minute.
James is replacing me very soon. Yeah.
And you're doing a newsletter as well, aren't you? Is there, and that's to launch later on this year. Is there a name for that yet?
Not yet.
Sure.
I'm open
Watch
to
the eyes
all
again, James.
audio puns. No, really, please. If you have puns, I accept them. Please. But yeah, no, not yet. It's going to be a very audio-centric newsletter. Like I said, I'm going to be doing some music industry coverage as well. So I'm really hoping to kind of be able to cover both worlds. I think that there's going to be a great intersection of the two spaces. And I think ultimately we're just going to think of everything as audio content. And so I think what happens in podcasting will influence the music world. So anyway, long story short, yes, I will be doing a newsletter. It should be coming out this summer. Everybody, please subscribe.
We will put a link in the show notes for those of you listening on demand as a podcast. We'll be putting a link to the show notes for that. But I'm. And is that going to be weekly? Have you worked out sort of the general shape of that?
The plan was weekly because it's still a little bit out. We haven't revisited and ironed out the details, but as far as I know, yeah, it'll be weekly. I'm still kind of figuring out, where it slots into the podcast newsletter ecosystem, like your newsletter, so trying to figure out what I can bring to the table that's a little bit different than that's already out there. So stay tuned.
Yeah, maybe a great way for people to be able to follow your stories without paying for the whole Bloomberg thing, which I guess is one of those things too, isn't it?
Now, moving on, Descript, which I like to use for audio editing, have announced coming out very shortly a first look at something called New Workflows. It'll let you jump to editing in Descript with one click. So some of our favourite video streamers are there. Riverside, our sponsors, Squadcast, friends of the show, Captivate, and one I've not really used myself, Restreamio. But it looks like Descript's starting to branch out to get itself integrated into the workflow.
Yeah, it's all really interesting. I find it fascinating that there are lots of different companies now doing plugins to other companies just to make life, an awful lot easier. Riverside did that plugin to Spotify, which was a very clever move. So the more of that, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
You don't have your podcast at the moment, Ashley, but do you edit it yourself, or would you be editing it yourself?
I do not edit audio, but I have used Descript in the past. When I used to do a podcast, we used Descript a few times, and it's very cool. I used it also when I did a podcast, I guess it was last year now, with the synthetic voices, and we messed with Descript software to do that, which was, creepy and fun and weird. But yeah, I mean, for someone like me who doesn't, get super granular editing audio, obviously Descript is a tool that is designed for people like me who need to just get it done kind of quick and dirty and try to get it over with and sounding good enough.
Yeah, and it's great. It's one of the things that I was showing off to the radio industry. The thesis of the talk that I gave at the Radio Days Europe conference last week was basically we've moved from a world where you have to have massive, great big studios and very expensive equipment to being able to do pretty well anything you want on your own laptop using consumer technology, and showing the radio industry some of the new tools that podcasters get to play with. And I showed a bit of Descript, and you could hear people's gasps and and them going, oh wow, so we don't have to use Pro Tools and all this kind of stuff. It was really it was really, really interesting. And it to me, I find it fascinating, the whole world of, professional audio, if you like, in terms of the heritage radio broadcasters meeting the world of podcasting. I find it fascinating seeing what happens there.
Well, if you want to know more, they're doing a live webinar on the 1st of June at 9 a.m. Pacific. So, James, perfect timing for you.
Oh, well, excellent. Yes, that'll be in the middle of the night for me, but yes, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Now, let's move on to some quick news. James, you wrote a piece about a pirated copy of your podcast. If you found it, here's how you can report it. Well, James, can you report it? Because there is a pirated copy of Podland out there on Spotify.
Yeah, and reading this in the script is the first that I know about it.
Thanks for reading it early then.
Yeah, I read it in the coffee shop half an hour ago. So yes, I am absolutely fascinated in finding out where this pirated version of the show is coming from. What is confusing me, and I am literally at the moment doing hacking into it to work out where it's from. Weirdly, it's from Buzzsprout as well, so it looks to be a duplicate, not a pirate. But we'll see what happens there. But
It's a bug, not a feature.
But there's a story. There will be a story in Pod News next week, or indeed in Bloomberg later on this week, talking about what some podcast hosts are finding their free trials being used for. So that's going to be entertaining. It'll be on Monday because there's quite a lot of tech information there. But it turns out that free trials are being used for all kinds of things that I was completely unaware of. So it'll be fun to have a look at that. And a pirated audio is part of that, but there is also other entertaining things as well. So yeah.
Love a mystery. What a little teaser.
Yeah, sorry about that. and I have just also taken the other story that I'm hoping to break next week out of the script as well.
Right. Sorry,
it's all right. Somebody has already tweeted my little piece of fun code, which we will talk about, I'm sure, next week once I've been able to get a few statements from companies doing some interesting things.
Okay. Now, you had a first look at a new company, a new podcasting, publishing, analytics and growth platform called Co-Host. The launch coincides with the release of Co-Host's first annual Podcaster Insight Survey. Who is Co-Host, James?
Yeah, it's a new podcast hosting company which is being produced by Quill up in Toronto in Canada, and very cool. It's interesting seeing, I think, podcast hosts beginning to niche and beginning to really focus on specific things. And Co-Host is very much focusing on growth as well as monetization, and really focusing on that rather than being a podcast host for all things to all people. So interesting seeing that. They also became a gold supporter on Pod News, which is very kind of them. podnews.net/support. Acast has done some integration with Podcastle. It's another one of those integrations like the Descript one that we were talking about earlier. I really like the idea, it was an Australian thing, but I really like the idea of a company called Podnow, which is taking pop-up podcast studios into conferences. We see pop-up podcast studios in podcast conferences all the time, but they don't normally, they're not normally there for the the Toilet Association annual conference or the bin bag, conferences. So, a really interesting idea of actually grabbing. The idea, I think, is if you grab speakers as they come off stage, then you can quickly get an interview with them, turn that into a podcast, and it works. It's not catching them off guard.
I don't write like you. I can do what I like. I just talk rubbish. You two are the serious journalists here. You can do what you like.
I'm not a serious journalist. I've got no qualifications at all. There's only one qualified journalist on this show.
Don't look this way. Yes.
What else have we seen this week, Sam?
The one thing, and Ashley, I wonder what you think, but audiograms, should you use them? Shouldn't you use them? There's been reports that they're a waste of time. No one needs them, and now we've got another report saying from Riverside saying that audiograms work 5 times as well as static images on social media. Where do you stand? Are we just all pushing noise out and no one's listening, or is there a good way to get podcast discovery through audiograms?
I'd be very curious what Riverside's methodology is for finding out whether audiograms work well. But I don't know. I mean, if it really is a significant time suck, and you can measure your engagement, I think, on your audiogram. So if you're seeing no engagement and you're putting a ton of time in, seems to me you should probably give that up. But at the same time, I totally empathize with people who it's like, well, how else are you going to put audio out on Twitter or something like that? Which is fair. And I do think there probably need to be some better solutions for it. I know people were hoping like Facebook ads would be able to play audio because I don't think they do right now. So I know things like that where people are hoping that could change.
Yeah, and
I mean,
and there's companies like Adori Labs which are looking at automating the entire thing, so being able to automatically pull in, images and other stuff to basically make the video bit work, which is really cool if you can do that. So, interesting seeing. I think it's certainly going to be a thing in the future in terms of YouTube, because obviously, you'll need visuals there. Signal Hill Insights released some data earlier on in the week showing that people really want to, if there's something on YouTube, then they want video to be with that. So they want it to be a nice experience. I know that next week Pod News will be carrying some really good data about how YouTube, how popular YouTube is in terms of podcast audiences as well. So so it'll be fascinating to have a look at too.
Okay, moving on. One more thing then. Rode is to release a brand new Rodecaster Pro 2. Well, they didn't say they were going to do it. Someone, by mistake, leaked it out.
Yes, a New Zealand website basically published the whole thing, which was very kind of them for 6 hours.
All of the graphics and images, it was wonderful.
All the graphics and images and the spec sheet as well, which was kind of them. It's going to be properly launched next week. Rode, of course, being an Australian company and very good too. Michael Sterling's Sterling Clear Audio was the blog that leaked all of that. But, it looks great. It looks, you're using a Rodecaster in front of us right now, and I'm sure that the new version is going to be even smarter and even cooler. So really nice to end up seeing that.
Yeah, no, well, one of the big things it's going to allow us to do is to put two laptops into the same Rode mixer. And you can also do guitar and external mics as well, which is quite nice.
Indeed. 10 minutes left. Let's talk people. Lots of moves at Spotify, Ashley. We've seen changes of senior management. Michael Mignano leaving, which I think was one of your many scoops. Max Cutler being promoted. There are, Bill Simmons being promoted too. Matt Lieber going. Folks from Reply All going as well. What's going on over there?
I mean, I
is it as simple as it's 3.5 years since Gimlet was bought or whatever that is, and so therefore it's people's contracts are now letting them leave?
Yeah, I think oftentimes founders tend to leave the companies once their options vest or whatever their contract expires. So, it's always tricky because on one hand you're like, well, all these people are leaving at once, and Courtney Holt also left.
Yeah.
That one,
oh yes, of course,
a bit more striking, only because he didn't come through an acquisition. He was hired. He kind of was one of the original podcast strategy architects over there. So, yeah, I think there's clearly some kind of rethinking around how they're structuring things. They obviously shut down Studio 4. I think it was in December or January of this year. And so clearly they're reorganizing, rethinking maybe what the shows they put effort into and how they work with partners. And, James, you've written about this quite a bit, like given that many of their partner shows, the splashy announcements haven't really come to fruition, I think we can kind of fill in the blanks there as to maybe they do need to rethink how they work with these partners.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting watching. I just kind of look into this and go, there are so many people. There are so many people there. I'm surprised at how many people are, working on that sort of thing. So, maybe it's just a case of actually thinning the amount of management folk, out there. If we are indeed at the start of a recession and the start of, some economic issues, one of the first things to go in terms of that is advertising anyway. So, perhaps there's a little bit of planning, on there. But again, maybe it's just a case of, it's the end of somebody's contract time.
Yeah, well, Amazon seems to be at it as well. So Amazon's director of podcasts announced he left the company to start his own stealth company. Todd Pringle, who's been with Amazon Podcast Operations since the start. So yeah, that was an Ashley scoop as well, by the way. Just thought I'd give her the credit for that as well.
Yeah. So we may as well have a button saying another Ashley Carman scoop.
The Verge had the Mignano scoop, and then I wrote about Lieber leaving.
So what Amazon is fascinating because you've got Wondery, which is doing great guns by all accounts, but Amazon doesn't seem to be moving the needle in terms of a podcast destination. We're not necessarily seeing Wondery promote Wondery Plus in the Amazon Music podcast player. You know what I mean? It's all. Do you see Amazon still wanting to be a destination in terms of an app?
I honestly am not totally sure. Like, it is very clear that that's Spotify's ambitions, both to be a place where people, like, basically they want everyone to consume audio on their platform. Amazon, is doing pretty well regardless. So I almost wonder if it's more about the advertising business. I'm pretty sure Insider wrote a story the other day about how their advertising business has been great for them. And I can imagine they see podcasting / audio in general just as a really rich place to do that. I've been surprised at how little I've heard about Art19 as an example. I don't really hear people talk about it as much, whereas Spotify is constantly pushing Megaphone and also Anchor. So yeah, I'm not totally sure what their big broad thinking is, but it seems like, they're pretty interested in locking up those exclusives, at least to do ad sales and represent them.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what goes on there. One other person that we should mention is Elena Fernandez-Collins. They're a well-known podcast critic. They've written about podcasting. They host podcasting. They're now working at Simplecast. So many congratulations there. What else shall we do, Sam?
Very quickly, just one big announcement in Tech Corner. The new live tag went live. Yes.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, lots of work in terms of making sure that if you're using a new podcast app, that your favorite podcast is going live. We will have saddened Adam and Dave by not using that for this live experience, but who knows what we might do.
I'm trying to still work out how to use it. So yes, Adam and Dave, come on and let me know, please. Okay, we should wrap up there very quickly. Event Corner. Next week, James, you're here for one reason. Apart from your Swedish visit, you're here for something else.
Yes, so I'm here for the Podcast Show 2022, which starts on Wednesday. There's 2 full days of a business conference. There's also a week's worth of live shows as well, which I think is a great plan to do around a podcast conference, to actually get, it surprises me when you go to these large podcast conferences how little talent there is there. I don't mean how little talent in terms of people. I mean how little podcasts are being made there. That's right. What I really mean to say.
Well dug out.
Yes, digs very hard. So that's great to end up seeing. So so I'm hoping to catch a few shows there, but that's going to be next week. You have you have done the slightly foolish thing of booking a very small pub for a drinks and then publishing on Twitter where and where.
It's the old schoolboy error. I'm having a party at the house. Here's the announcement on Facebook. No one else will turn up. Honestly, Dad.
Here's the address. So good luck with that. But I'm looking forward to that on Tuesday. That should be fun.
Yeah, Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. if you're in Belgravia. 17th century pub, which is haunted. It's the old Grenadier Guards Officer Club.
See what you're missing, Ashley. See what you're missing.
I'm missing that. Yeah. That sounds cool. I just want to be a bouncer.
Yeah, exactly.
It's okay. I'll be there.
Yeah, you could be working out of Bloomberg has some very posh offices in the city, so you should be working out of there for this week. And of course, Podcast Movement coming up in Dallas in Texas in August. I really must organise my tickets for that.
And one other event that we want to publicise, Pinterest has been announced as the lead partner for the International Women's Podcast Festival here in London. The event is Saturday, June the 18th. James, you've been very kindly offering some discounts.
Yeah, it's not me kindly offering them; it's the organisers. But yes, if you are outside the UK and you just want a virtual ticket, then there's money off that, and there's also and then there's also in-person tickets for the UK folk as well. You'll find all the details in our show notes and the Pod News newsletter at podnews.net.
Right, James. Now, what's been happening for you in Podland?
Well, yes, I've been. I tell you one thing I did do. I took the 7th longest commercial flight to get here, from Darwin all the way to London. And if you're interested in that, then you should go back through my Twitter or something and find the 7th find my trip report, because I'm one of these people that writes to keep myself sane on long journeys, and just sort of write a log of what
Other people
happened.
just watch films, James.
Yeah, I know. I don't like watching.
Or drink alcohol.
Yeah. Oh no, I do that.
Or do both.
So that was fun. Went to see my family in Wales, in Welsh Wales, which was also fun. Trying desperately to drive a stick shift car for the first time in 6 years. It's not going very well.
But you got here.
Yeah, I got.
You might not get back.
I got here. It's the funny sort of smell of burning when you're in reverse that slightly concerns me. What's happening for you this week in Podland, Sam?
Well, last week I was doing something called Podcast in the Park. It was an event, so local chefs, Michelin chefs Tom Kerridge and Michelle Rue, I interviewed them. I interviewed the remaining Sister Sledge sister. That was quite entertaining. She had her daughters with her on stage, so they're called the Sister Sledge now, but it's only one sister. The other two, don't know what they've done. Didn't ask her. Was too scared to ask.
Sister-daughter sledge.
Yeah. Rag and Bone Man and McFly. So that was a bit of fun last week. I will be with you at the podcast show. I'm on stage for Sony, talking about the growing love affair between podcast, film and TV. And actually Sony, I'm curious, we never talk about them. We talk about Amazon, we talk about Apple, we talk about Spotify, but Sony are investing heavily into podcasting. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to say.
Yeah, most definitely. And with their acquisition of something else, that's a big UK powerhouse which has gone in there as well. So yeah, absolutely. I will also be on stage at the podcast show. I'm doing a session about monetization with a bunch of people from Sony. I'm doing a session about Tenderfoot TV, which will be really interesting. I know very little about Tenderfoot TV, and by Wednesday I'll know a lot more, because I'll have had to read up about it in order to ask some sensible questions of Donald Albright, and I'm also talking about where the future of podcasting is going. So we'll see how that goes.
And what's happening for you, Ashley? What's coming up?
What's coming up? Wow. Well, I don't want to give away too much of what I'm working on.
See, the pair of you. What are you like?
Hey, James, mine aren't in the show notes, so I don't have to read them. It's going to be 90 degrees in New York tomorrow, supposedly. I don't know what that is in Celsius. I can't help you, but very warm. Yeah, it is very warm. So I might try to make my way to the beach. We'll see.
Oh,
very nice. 32 Celsius for those of you playing along at home.
Well, we're off for a crafty tug now, aren't we?
Yes, that which is Sam's boat where he serves beer.
What? There's a boat out there?
Yep. We have a tugboat.
Okay, I'm really coming out to London next year, because I want that boat invite. I want the 17th century pub invite.
Yeah. I'm going to show you one of the other ones. We've got a double-decker bus as well.
This will be great.
What?
This is a great podcast.
Other way, there you go.
That's for those who can't see. That's the inside of the double-decker bus. So we've got a studio in
All
there.
right.
It looks like
Sold. I'm coming to London.
excellent.
soon.
Well, we will, come next year for Podcast Show 2023 if they haven't gone bust.
And she podcasts.
And She Podcast. No, absolutely. She Podcast would be good. Do you have a date for that?
No, but I have a new venue.
And on that bombshell, that's it for this week. If you like Podland, tell others to visit. Tell your friends on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, or wherever.
Wherever. You can also email comments at podland.news. You'll find all of our previous shows and interviews at podland.news.
If you want daily news, you should get Pod News. The newsletter is free at podnews.net. The podcast can be found in your podcast app, and all the stories we've discussed on Podland today are in the show notes. We use chapters and transcripts too. And I should also point out, obviously, if you want to learn more about what Ashley is doing, then you should be going to have a look on Bloomberg. Is there a simple URL, Ashley, that we should be pointing people to?
I mean, I feel like anytime you're telling people to go to a URL, it's never going to be simple. But, follow me on Twitter at Ashley R. Carman. I tweet all my stories, so you'll find it there.
Okay, that just asked me the question, what's the R stand for?
Oh, my middle initial.
I do know.
Unfortunately, there is a Ashley Carman at Salesforce. If she is listening to this podcast, please give me the handle. Don't use it. I'm pretty sure people have followed you because they think you're me. Like, let's just
I once met a lovely woman. This was about 15, 20 years ago in Dublin, in Ireland, and she was absolutely, I was quite smitten. And she contacts James Cridland on Facebook, and everything goes really quiet for about 2 weeks. And I think, oh, well, that's a shame because she was quite fun. And it turns out that she was talking to James Cridland, the student from Bristol. You bastard. James Cridland, student from Bristol. That's all I could say.
Not still forgotten. Anyway.
Our music is from Ignite Jingles. We're hosted and sponsored by our good friends Buzzsprout and Squadcast. And until next week, keep listening.
And thank you for watching. Take care.
Thank you so much. Sam is going to have to press the stop